There are two kinds of people in this world. The people who fail to do what they know they should, and those who keep doing things they know they shouldn't. Guess what? You're both. Hi, I'm your podcast host and life and business coach, Marcy Barker, aka your loving kick in the pants. In this podcast, I'll teach you the 6 steps of my accountability code framework that will enable you to wake up with clarity and show up with aligned action steps that make follow through easy and peaceful. When you're ready for more, head to marcybarker.com and we'll chat about your next goal. All right, let's dive in. Hello, my beautiful people. Today on the podcast, I want to share with you some tips about being honest, because when we talk about the accountability code, I tell everybody it does not work unless you're honest. And this week I had some friends over for dinner and they asked me how my last speaking engagement was. And I just shared different things that I really enjoyed about talking to business owners and business entrepreneurs, people who are trying to grow business. And this lady came up to me and she wants me to train or coach a big group of her general managers because she has 13 locations of this franchise. And we got into this conversation at dinner with this employee who he doesn't like his boss. So we were talking about what I can do for companies. And he's like, but how could you make that work at my company? Because nobody likes my boss. And I told him, I said, unfortunately, it requires honesty. Like, it doesn't work if somebody's not willing to change. And I told my friends that I've coached people who were not honest, and you don't make any progress. You don't get where you want to go if you're not willing to admit where you are right now. And so in today's podcast, I want to share with you some different tips and specific to each step of the code that help you be honest, because really the ability to be accountable brings you peace and happiness and clarity. And I think it's because that's how you learn to be honest with yourself. And when you're honest with yourself, you are more comfortable with who you are, or you are more uncomfortable with who you really are. And that gives you motivation to change it. So even as I'm talking about this, we could kind of go into a rabbit hole about honesty and its role in accountability. But I don't want to get too deep with this, because as you use your own process of the accountability code, like, you're going to recognize where you're being challenged to be honest. Now, you might be like somebody who you're like, I don't lie. Like, I try to be very forthright and I try to be very honest. But sometimes the dishonesty shows through our actions. Like, I'm going to eat healthier and then you eat a piece of cake. It's like, that's not really a dishonest thing that you said, but in your actions, it didn't line up with what your mind is telling your body to do. So what I really like about the emphasis of being honest is, like, it works. And it's not always easy. Like, trust me, I've made a lot of mistakes and I'm pretty ego driven. And sometimes that is tempting to paint a picture, to exaggerate, or to make something not exactly as it is. So I guess I'm just admitting, like, we all struggle with this, but the accountability code brings you so much peace and happiness when you're willing to challenge your honesty as well. Not just your accountability, but challenge your honesty. So let's dive into it. The very first step of the accountability code is reflection. And the first tip is to be brutally honest with yourself in reflection. Now, the beautiful thing about reflection is you do not have to tell anybody what's going on in your brain. Like, you don't have to advertise what you're thinking about. You don't have to journal it and share it with anybody. Reflection is thinking on your goals, your values, and your problems. So when you're doing this reflection with yourself, be really honest about how you're doing. Like, man, I sucked because I yelled at my kids today. Or, man, I said I was going to do this thing and I didn't do it. Or, I tried to be in a happy mood, but something else got the best of me and I really sucked in that situation. Now, if you are somebody who deals with negative self-talk, this might sound familiar to you. I don't want you to go down the hole of being really negative with yourself, because you don't have to be negative, but I do want you to be honest about where you're falling short and ask yourself, am I making excuses for where I'm at, or am I actually being truthful about how I behaved in a certain situation? And I can tell you this, it is so much easier to be honest with yourself in private than it is to be honest with other people in person. So I want you to use this to your advantage. When you are reflecting with yourself, like, don't lie to yourself. Do not lie to yourself, because that's not going to get you anywhere. And it's almost like creating a program that's bound to crash. Like, it's just not going to work because it doesn't make sense. So that's the first thing, is just be brutally honest with yourself in your reflection. Number 2 is drop your ego and acknowledge that, like, you're not all that in a bag of chips, and nobody is. Like, we are all imperfect. We're all trying our best. But the second that you admit that you do fall short, that's where humility is able to work its magic. And humility is a modest view of who you are now related to who you can be. And if you believe that you are already at that can be, then you're done. There's nothing to do. But that's not the reality of life. Like, you're not done. You're still here. You still got stuff to do. So again, the nice thing about humility is that this can be done in a private setting. You don't have to go and confess anything to anybody, but you do have to recognize, like, yeah, I do want to be somewhere else in my life and I'm not there yet. And it's probably my fault or my reasoning that I'm not there yet. So when you drop the ego, you're also dropping the victim mentality of why you're not where you want to be yet. So this includes admitting when you're wrong, or admitting that you don't know something, or admitting that you are repeating the same mistakes over and over. So recognize that growth absolutely requires humility. And you cannot really learn to be humble unless you're honest about your shortcomings. So a good way to recognize if you're being honest or not is if you're getting defensive about your shortcomings, then chances are there's a wall or there's pride in the way of you accepting that next level of growth. I love the conversation of humility, because even people who are very prideful like myself, humility becomes one of your best friends, because when you use humility, you become an even more powerful or effective person. If I'm explaining that the right way, like, I'm a very confident person, so it can make me very prideful. It can make me extroverted. But when it's rooted in humble thoughts and humble intentions, it's like my strengths are magnified. And humility makes sure that your actions are done with love or done with the right intention. So the chances of you messing up in your action goes down. The third tip I have for you is to set clear and realistic goals. And this goes along with the third step of the accountability code, which is planning. So planning is a detailed proposal for achieving success. Now, I've seen this multiple times. I've had a client that came to me and she's like, I want to make $5 million next year, because then I can take my family here. I can donate to this charity. I can do that. And she wanted to make $5 million with her business, but she was still working a job. She wasn't actually working on her business just yet. So when I hear people say big goals, that it's like, I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm not trying to talk crap on your goals, but let's talk about the realistic nature of what you're trying to do here. And when it comes to being accountable, if you're trying to take big, massive jumps that you're not in shape for, you're setting yourself up for failure. So be truthful about what you can actually commit to. And I would say that this is where it's really important to have a coach or a mentor in place, so they can accurately assess your abilities and they can help you take those leaps to get there much faster instead of you doing it on your own. It's kind of like having a trainer at the gym where you're like, okay, I'm going to bench press. You're not going to go from bench pressing the bar to bench pressing 5 times that weight. That's just not how it works. But when you start with the bar and you consistently add weight, you're going to get to a point where your trainer is going to spot you and they're going to help you, because if they're not there to spot you, there's just no way you could get to the next level. So you have to be truthful to like what you can actually do. And there's nothing wrong with setting a goal that you're unsure that you can do, but it needs to be realistic. And a lot of times you just have to be honest of like, okay, if you want to make $1 million, great, but have you made $100? Have you made $1,000? Have you made $10,000? Like, you've got to have the system in place that's actually going to bring you the outcome. And over promising something to yourself not only leads to burnout, but it takes away your trust. So again, if you're like, I'm not going to eat any cake, I'm going to be so super healthy. And then you surround yourself with lots of cake. You find yourself in the wrong situation. You weren't really realistic with what your goals are. It's important to recognize little steps are probably going to be more effective, but you're the only one that can be honest about that. Hey, my beautiful people. The message of waking up and showing up is yours for the taking. In fact, it's completely free. All you got to do is take this quick action. I've recorded my entire audiobook and I'd love for you to consume it between episodes. Head to marcybarker.com to get instant access to the accountability code, Wake Up and Show Up. The next step is to not just plan something, but like truthfully act on it. I think that this is really hard to come to terms with, but I think we've all done something where we have thought about doing something and we didn't even try. We didn't even start. We literally didn't even start the plan. And in church a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how when you pray and you have real intent to get an answer, somebody said like real intent means you're actually going to act on it. And I went down the rabbit hole a little bit of intent actually is not an action word. It is a thought. It is the ability to reason a decision in your head first. So in order for you to implement something, the intention needs to be correct. Because if the intention is not correct for you, then you won't ever hit the trigger for that thing. So don't just plan something, because getting stuck in planning mode means that you are keeping yourself stuck. And you might be doing it on purpose or you might not be. But I would say that the biggest hiccup that people come up to with this one is that somebody else made their plan for them. And they didn't have any buy-in or they didn't have any say in what they actually wanted to do. So they don't execute on a plan because it's just not that fun for them. That doesn't sound like it's up their alley. It doesn't sound like it'll benefit them. And if you're not honest about the plans that you're accepting, then it's going to be really easy for you to adopt a plan that just is not even right for you. So this brings us to the next one. Own your commitments. Commitment is the fifth step of the accountability code, and owning your commitments is where you adopt the expectation. And commitment is dedicating yourself to a person or a cause. And the updated definition I've been using is that you're binding yourself to an outcome. So this is where you're really tested on your honesty. It's like, are you going to do the thing you said you were going to do? Now, if you've done the first 4 steps of the code, then chances are you're way more realistic about your commitment and your ability to follow through is going to be good. But even when it's not, like, let's say that you set a goal. One year I set a goal that I was going to have a $70,000 launch and I did it. And then the next time I was like, okay, I'm going to double it. I'm going to have a $150,000 launch. You guys, I didn't do it. It's not that I didn't try. It's just that it didn't happen. So when you own your commitments, there probably was some room for me to be like, I'm not going to stop until it happens. So I could have hit a $150,000 launch if I was going to take some massive action, or if I was going to change deadlines, if I was going to allow payment plans. Like, there's all these different factors that could have happened. But the reality of being honest with yourself and your commitment is that you got to work hard. Even when you want to give up, there's the balance between, okay, now that I'm taking action, I'm realizing maybe my commitment was a little bit out there. But if you drop the ball, just acknowledge where you're at instead of hiding it. Commitment is when you're binding yourself to an outcome. This is important to recognize that this is how you take a leap up. Like, accountability doesn't happen in you meeting every single expectation all the time. Accountability is you taking action on your intentions. So even when it's hard, you just have to stick with it. And if you can take one step of the code and extend yourself a little bit further, that's a much better plan than trying to overextend yourself in every single step of the code, which I would say if you're overextending yourself in every step of the code, it's because you weren't honest. So you have to recognize when you're making excuses, because when it comes to honesty, it's one thing to say, oh, dang, I set the wrong goal, or I didn't take this into consideration, rather than being like, you know what, that was a stupid goal in the first place. And I don't know why I decided to do that because blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's not going to help you. Just be honest about, oh man, I overextended myself, or I committed to too many things, or I thought I could do it on my own when in reality, I probably should have hired somebody. So when you're making excuses, really it's an opportunity for you to practice honesty again. And practicing honesty is how you increase your ability to be accountable. So a couple more things I will say. The last step of the accountability code is feedback. So feedback is where you, again, have to practice being honest with what actually happened and not skewing the perception or skewing the data that's collected. Like you literally have to practice saying, here's what it is, and this is what it's going to be. And based on this data is how we can improve. So I think that being open to criticism and using it as a tool is very important. And it's also going to be effective when you're honest about wanting feedback, because I've also seen other clients in situations where they say they want feedback, but really they have no intention of changing their plan. And that kind of brings me back to the story with my friends that I had over for dinner, is that this friend was complaining that his boss paid a consulting company a lot of money to update the processes in business and to help him be more accountable. But the boss made no changes. The boss made no changes after a while. And it became apparent to everybody in the office that he wasn't really honest in wanting change within the office. So seeking feedback is a very crucial way to recognize how you repeat the process again in being accountable, because that honesty in the past is what helps you be more realistic and more honest in the future. So the last thing I will say about being honest and practicing honesty in the accountability code is know that you deserve it. You deserve honesty for yourself, because when you are able to look at yourself in the mirror and you recognize all of the things that you are doing right and recognizing the things where you fell short, that transparency and awareness with yourself is such a great reward in all aspects of your life, because people accept you for who you are and you learn how to accept others for where they're at, because you recognize that we're all just trying to do our best. And when you're honest with yourself, the ability to try a little bit better just becomes easier. So having honesty really is so important, but I want you to know that honesty brings happiness. And at the end of the day, you deserve happiness. So I hope that this was eye-opening for you, because practicing honesty is not always easy, but you're here listening to a podcast, whether it's in private or, chances are it is in private. I don't know of many people who all listen to a podcast together, but let's just pretend you're listening to this podcast while you're by yourself. I encourage you to give yourself that promise that you are going to be a little bit more honest, that you are going to say, I'm not going to sugarcoat it as much, or I'm going to be a little bit more transparent with my efforts, because I promise you it will bring happiness, and your ability to follow through with what really matters will definitely increase. So if you have any questions about this, or if you want to discuss honesty, or if you want to confess anything to me, I'm here for that. But really, I'm here to boost you up. I'm here to offer you feedback. I'm here to offer you grace and compassion. And I will remind you that my nickname, Your Loving Kick in the Pants, it was actually my clients who gave me that loving adjective. And that's because I want you to know I'm here for you. And at the end of the day, your ability to be accountable is something that you deserve. And I want that for you. All right, everybody, I'll see you next week for another episode of Your Loving Kick in the Pants. I love you. Thank you for listening, friends. If you got value out of this episode, I would love for you to drop a review or share this with a friend. Let's be real. Let's spread the word, because we all know someone who could use your loving kick in the pants.